All right. Well, I guess we'll start right now. Welcome, everyone. My name is Monique, and this is the ASLA NCC Emerging Professionals Group panel discussion with the Urban Studio. We are so excited for them to be here. This is really exciting. Thank you all for coming and participating. That was a selection from Earth, Wind, and Fire, Gratitude, and we are just so happy and thankful for not only you all to come on your Friday to spend time with us, but for the Urban Studio to really be here and share who they are, what they do, and how they're really impacting the community. So with that being said, we are the Emerging Professionals Group. My name is Monique. I'm the Vice President in the California chapter and also a lead in the Emerging Professionals Group. And our focus is to build community through engagement, through promoting the voice of the students and the emerging professionals, and to also give back. And we are really thankful for our sponsor, Miracle Play Systems, who is able to sponsor our events. Very grateful for them. An upcoming event that we have a creative expression and imagination salon that's coming up August 20th. So please sign up in your emails that you'll get an invite from. And please, if you are really wanting to be involved, we are more than happy to get you involved in anything that we are currently doing. So please email Krista and we'll get you involved. Also, we wanted to let you guys know that we have the Jedi Call to Action plan. So we sent out a statement recently, and as a result of that, we created an action plan, and we have Blake, who's our president. He is spearheading this committee, and so we really want you all to be involved, and we want the voice, the collective voice of our chapter to really make a change with justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And as a result of this statement, we actually supported the Urban Studio, which is why we're so happy for them to be a part of this panel discussion. We gave $5,000 of donations, and we hope to continue the relationship and partnership with them. And now, without further ado, we are going to have our talk with the Urban Studio, Equity by Design. So you see we have Kendra, Macy, Andrew, Davi, Jen, and Jelani. So I'm gonna give their bios and then we're gonna get right into it. So first things first, they're gonna do a waterfall effect presentation. So if you don't mind, please turn off your videos and mute yourselves, and then I'll give a presentation of them. All right, so first things first, for those who don't know, the Urban Studio is a Washington, D.C. based 501c3 organization created in 2019 with proven capacity to equity, engagement, diversity, and to engage diverse communities. They are an organization owned and operated by a cohort of designers of color committed to addressing racial and environmental disparities through the discipline of landscape architecture. So first is Kendra Hyson. Kendra is a trained landscape architect and urban designer, currently working as a senior planner with the Prince George's County Planning Department. Kendra also serves on the Chesapeake Bay Conservation and Partnership Steering Committee and various ASLA national committees. She exudes a deep commitment to a community-based planning and passion for using design as a tool to achieve social equity. As a native Washingtonian, she continues to pursue her commitment to equity and inclusivity in the design process through the facilitation of youth and community design programs throughout the district. Next up is Maisie. Maisie brings decades of leadership and management to her practice. As a 2018-2019 Leadership and Innovations Fellow with the Landscape Architecture Foundation. She explores identity in documentary series that records how a variety of people interpret the same 5 urban landscapes. Honest and unvantaged sites provide a framework for people-centered design. Maisie won the National Capital Area chapter of the American Planning Association 2016 Frederick Umphen Award for Distinguished Leadership by the Professional Planner and the 2014 Award of Merit for the Citizen Advocate Handbook. Maisie is an urban designer and a certified arborist with a master's degree in landscape architecture from Morgan State University and a Bachelor of Arts in Afro-American Studies from Howard University. Andrew is a landscape designer and innovative new member of the Lionheart team in Austin, Texas. Andrew's design sensibilities combined with his technical abilities allow him to work on some of the most complex projects. His technical proficiency using various software has been instrumental in coordination between multiple consultants and his internal design teams. Andrew is the recent recipient of the Landscape Architecture Foundation's Research Fellowship. His research will focus on immersive technology's role in the landscape architecture today and its effect on the client and public engagement within the design process. Next up is David. David is born and raised in South Central Los Angeles, the occupied territories of the Towavan people. David is the first of his family to pursue higher education. Today, David is working with the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust to address park justice and green space access as a project manager. He currently manages 3 projects throughout Los Angeles at various phases of development, from early community design to construction. In these projects, he brings his commitment to hearing from community voices and fulfilling those expectations through build projects. He looks forward to contributing to the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust and also expand the work of Studio South Central in his own neighborhood. Jen is up next. Jen is an integrative land designer, educator, and landscape architect with over 12 years of experience as a landscape architect in New York City, San Francisco, and Seattle, expanding her skill sets beyond traditional modes of urban design practice. Her work seeks to redistribute power in the design process to address issues in spatial justice. In collaboration in 1982 Foundation, they prototyped Dear Chinatown, DC, a making and sharing pop-up installation that explored how we can redesign public engagement practices that give community members a more meaningful role in how our neighborhoods are planned and designed. And last, Jelani Bird is a passionate student, international traveler, and lifelong learner, currently working toward his high school diploma with a focus in architecture and engineering at Phelps Ace High School in Washington, DC. He is also pursuing advanced coursework at the University of District of Columbia. Jelani has spent years of independent study refining his artistic abilities to prepare himself for his future organized education. Through this independent study, Jelani has acquired professional proficiency in a myriad of fields, including sound design, video editing, graphic design, web design, and more. As previous participant in the Studio DC program with the Urban Studio, Jelani never ceased to showcase his skills as a designer and collaborative leader, producing high quality work with his fellow cohort members. Jelani's greatest desire in life is to create the world I would have wanted to grow up in, and most importantly, have fun while doing it. So without further ado, I'm gonna hand it over to the Urban Studio.
Thank you, Monique. Kendra, it's hard to believe that it's only been a little over a year since we founded the Urban Studio, because we had this idea of what our profession could bring to the world. And we have now evolved, right? We have a working board with 6 members who share our vision. And because of this vision, we are the Urban Studio, and we want to see a world that ensures all people have the means to create healthy, vibrant, and just communities. And when we developed the Urban Studio, we made sure that we were a values-centered organization, and we have 5 values. Design is liberation, authentic and meaningful engagement, co-design and co-creation with communities of color, intergenerational leadership and mentorship, and to elevate experts of lived experience. So our first pilot project was Studio DC. Can you talk a little bit about how design as liberation is embodied in the Studio DC program?
Yes, so when we talk about design as liberation, it's really important for us to note that inequity, in a sense, has been designed. Specific systems have been put in place to intentionally oppress specific groups. And when we think about unfair housing practices, gentrification, displacement, things like environmental injustice and the prison system, all of these things are tools that have been designed as a means to enforce oppression. And so as designers, whether conscious or unconscious, our job requires us to consistently make decisions that dictate the livelihood and quality of life of people. And so much of our society is, or much of our livelihood in society is predicated on where we live and the opportunities that exist around where we live. So it's only natural that we have to design our way out of these unjust systems and to make our communities more equitable. So for us, that's the Urban Studio, the little plug right there. It's important that we provide the next generation with the tools necessary to combat these injustices and empower them to make change in their own communities. So the Studio DC program sought out to teach 10 students for 10 weeks the power of using design as a tool to transform communities. And we were overwhelmed with the response we got from students across the city, that we took on 12 students. And so after kind of the impetus behind this particular type of project is from our own personal experiences of entering to the profession and realizing very quickly that there weren't very many people who looked like me or shared the experiences that I had as an urban youth. And my training as a designer has done so much for me in terms of empowering my own personal voice and elevating my ideas to help shape my community. And so it seemed like an exciting proposition to be able to share this kind of newfound empowerment and newfound knowledge with the next generation. So for me, there's a quote by Frederick Douglass that really encapsulates this idea, and it is that it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. So with the Studio DC program, it seemed more advantageous and quite frankly, more fun to spend our time as opposed to trying to fix a broken system. Instead, we wanted to build a new one and offer young people the opportunity to build that with us. And it's an opportunity for them to not only help develop their communities, but to engage with one another, engage with us, and to feel important and empowered. And we wanted to encourage strong leadership and innovation through that process. And so it's an opportunity to funnel this untapped talent and idealism and the courage that young people have into something that's meaningful and potentially community changing. So we wanted to specifically offer these types of opportunities to young people from backgrounds similar to maybe myself or David or Maisie or any of the members of the Urban Studio, where we don't necessarily all come from backgrounds of privilege. As you heard in David's bio, I'm very similar. We are the first in our family to receive a high-level education. And we grew up in urban environments before it was the cool thing to do. And so often young people, especially from disadvantaged communities, get viewed as disruptive or disrespectful or lazy, and they're just traditionally ignored and just not designed for. And this puts them in a very challenging situation where they really have no control over what's going on. And so as a means to not only engage, but inspire, we work very diligently to make the Studio DC a collaborative space where we developed a system of values that allow everyone to have a say in the process. And now more than ever, our youth are extremely aware of their surroundings and the climate in which we live. So why not take the time to empower them with the tools they need now as a way to create positive change in the world for the future, and to expand the perspective of the profession that is lacking diversity of experience. And it's not only about creating more Black and Latino landscape architects or planners or architects. It's much bigger than that. It's really about expanding who gets to participate in these processes and who gets to participate in shaping their communities. And by imposing new voices, we can help to shine light on alternative experiences and stories that can help us all grow in a more equitable way. So designers have been complicit in the past in enabling these series of systemic barriers that maintain this status quo and that have continued to keep certain groups out of the conversation. So for us, this is about shifting the power structure. And for that shift, it's going to happen through the inclusion of voices of the next generation. And I want them to be as liberated by design as I have been. So with that in mind, I want to take it over to Jen Lowe, who has been doing amazing work in terms of authentic and meaningful engagement. And so I have a few questions for you, Jen. So my first question is, how have our existing engagement processes failed us?
That's a great question, Kendra. Thanks for having me here. I actually have a diagram to speak to that. So this might look familiar to some of you. It's been around for a long time. It's called Sherry Arnstein's A Ladder of Citizen Participation. And for me, over the past couple of years, this actually has been a really great framework to really think about the definition of meaningful and authentic engagement and assess and reflect on what I am doing and what I'm not doing and how to move forward from there. So this basically kind of talks about participatory planning, which we also know as like community engagement, community outreach, lots of names to it, right? So one end of the spectrum, it's controlled, limited participation. And at the other end, it's about granting power. So I think this is also going to be a theme in our conversation of about engagement that redistributes power where power hasn't been granted or previously denied to people. So within our processes and our design processes, we have been really operating on like the middle to lower parts of this ladder. So placation, consultation, informing, therapy, manipulation, we find these transactional activities, right? We have a checklist, we have a set of rules or guidelines that we have to kind of abide by. And we have really rushed processes, so there's really no room to evaluate what we could do differently or include scope to do something differently. But really, until we get to like these upper rungs, like if we start to like put steps in to talk about partnership and how we're going to get to delegated power and citizen control, then we're not going to be dealing with issues of equity. So we say we want to work on issues of social justice, of an environmental justice, but until this power shift happens, that can't happen. And we have such a beautiful portfolio of landscape architecture work since I've been around for 15 years, but we had crazy inequity to match that. So obviously the processes are just not working with the work that we've been doing.
I would agree with that. And so what does that authentic and meaningful engagement mean to you?
So I think for like really simply, we can start to unpack the things that we tacitly do with the authentic and meaningful relationships that already exist within our project work. So we think about our existing project teams and the clients that we serve and our consultant teams. But right now, like, our community partners are kind of at the side of all of those transactions or all of that engagement, right? So if we can start to unpack, like, the fact that we do a lot of relationship building in this profession, right, inherently. How can we make them a real true partner? So it's not designing for, it's designing with. So there's a lot of things that we can start to think about. I think about, like, general, like, community organizing principles have been really foundational. It's funny because I went to school for 2 years, these past 2 years, to do design research. And, like, everything I learned had to do with, like, community organizing and grassroots organizing. Had very little to do with what, like, the academy actually could offer in this scenario. But it's what you can do in the process, which comes with a ton of resources, a bunch of minds and expertise. So if you're going to be providing that park, what are you also putting on the table or providing for these community partners and these stakeholders and constituents, so that when you leave, you've built something that can be sustained and then built on top of. So I think that is sort of the mission and sort of the guidance of what that, if meaningful engagement really means actually making them a critical partner and that they are in charge of outcomes. So.
Cool. Well, with respect to your Dear Chinatown project that Monique mentioned earlier, you talk about invisibility in the engagement process. And so what do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, so I live in Washington, D.C., and my community partner that I've been working with over the past, like, year and a half is a Chinese American civil rights organization. And they specifically use storytelling as a means to organize and tell public histories about the significance of the Chinese exclusion laws and to our greater American history and immigrant history, right? So they, being specifically located in DC's Chinatown, which is like a Chinatown that is, like, significantly smaller than any other Chinatown around the country, there has been just a general, like, public sentiment that it's not a real Chinatown. Because it's in the city center, gentrification forces that have been happening in Washington, D.C. for what, like, at least, like, a long time, but, like,
10 years.
Right. So in the city center, I think probably 40 years since urban renewal and so forth. The Chinatown in DC was about 3,000 people at one point. Now it's about 300 elderly residents at this point. So I think that the part about invisibility is that those people, which are smaller groups, don't have as much access to public services because of language, because of any sort of, like, other priorities or vulnerabilities they might have. They can't participate in that process because our processes are typically a town hall meeting, right? Or a public meeting that happens in the evening between, like, 5 and 7 on a Wednesday. And you have to find that on a website. So for all of those reasons, we built this system, which we only have limited forms of participation. And if you can't participate, then you're just unseen, you're unheard, you don't matter in that process. And that is making a big statement, especially with how much inequality there is, especially us all living in Washington, D.C., of who can have accesses to services and infrastructure. That's sort of kind of what I've been trying to unpack with invisibility, how we as designers can make these stakeholders, these constituents heard and seen, and be made more visible. So to that note, I mean, I revealed a lot of, like, problems and things that we need to work on. So I'm really excited to actually talk to Davi in Los Angeles, who has been on the ground doing this work for a while. So I'm excited to hear what he has to say about dealing with these issues of invisibility. Hello, Davi.
Hey, Jan.
How's it going?
I'm pretty good. Super excited to be on.
Excellent. So, so to that note of invisibility, so how within LA are you reaching out to people who are disconnected from services to local government and just generally from society?
Yeah, I think for me, I have to really acknowledge and assess some of the assumptions I have related to communication and how people know or learn about current events. I think acknowledging the digital divide for me has been a really just like something I butt up against a lot. Recognizing that not everyone has access to technology, obviously, and obviously recognizing that formal processes too often like really are not inclusive, like you said. So in the case of Urban Studio here in South Central and the work here, I think I've relied a lot on the role and the leadership that my mother has provided in the community. And so that has provided me access to so many of my neighbors, so much trust. And I think I've been able to use that as a way to really find a way to contribute to continue to organize in the community. And so understanding day-to-day events are part of what kind of shape my processes around engaging youth, and really thinking through my communication goals and my outreach methods are what has really shaped the processes that I have around creating a youth program that's really robust. I think really understanding how to meet people where they are, really understanding that there's fabrics and communities that you can tap into are part of what designers should learn to pick up on to really make projects successful and really authentically engage communities.
Awesome, thank you. So who should be part of these conversations around co-design and co-creating?
Yeah, absolutely. So this question is always super important. So day-to-day people, local folks should be the ones who are part of these conversations. How we bring a formal process of participation to them is like always like paramount to any project. How we're accessing this local knowledge, how we're accessing a design process that's tailored to communities alongside community leaders that already exist in the community is just so important. Bringing in this leadership, bringing in a framework that institutionalizes paying leaders is so important as well. From there, like building those relationships, like you said, Jen, and then moving into like a process of common languages that's really unidirectional. So from designer to community, and then also back from community to designer is just like super critical.
Awesome. And then kind of going back, I touched on this briefly, but how do you like what does co-designing then and co-creating look like with communities of color? If our existing processes are not working, I guess what are you sort of experimenting with now?
Yeah, so I think for me, some of the things that have been super helpful is finding a way to integrate storytelling into how we interact with local youth and local community members, figuring out how to really interview key leaders in the community to hear from them and contextualize the issues that they're facing. Really finding a way to bring a conversation about place with local youth, and just like using different artistic methods to communicate messages about place. I think that's been super helpful for me. And this commitment to storytelling, to uncovering like this qualitative information helps articulate like this larger story of what the needs and wants are of a community. So for me, I mean, youth programs like Studio South Central and youth programs like Studio DC really aim to address this issue that that's kind of missing or in traditional decision-making processes. And I mean, Jelani, I wanna turn it over to Jelani and really hear from him. He's been an incredible addition to the board so far, an incredible leader, and has really just kind of brought his thinking and brought his input into the organization. So my question to you, Jelani, is talk to us a little bit about the Studio DC program. How was your experience? And let folks know and take them in on what you learned.
Well, first off, thank you very much for having me. But the Studio DC program, when I first started it, it was unlike any other program I had taken part in. I had been a part of other design programs through my school, which focuses in the architecture and engineering fields, and other programs through like local building museums and who partner with construction and architecture firms. But in all those programs, they taught us the design process for these projects that we were working on. But Kendra and Maisie did an excellent job of guiding us through the process and enabling us with the tools that we needed in order to make the project ours. It never felt like they were just telling us what sort of project to make or forcing us to go with a certain vision. They took our vision and helped us to actualize it in the way that we saw it should be. They provided their expertise and experience in the field so that we can see what it's actually like and what actually goes into these different projects and get a holistic view of it, because a lot of us coming into this had absolutely no experience before. We just like to draw or like to do music and stuff like that. So to be able to have them give us those skills was unlike anything else I experienced in previous design programs.
Yeah, that's super influential. That idea of intergenerational leadership and intergenerational mentorship is something that is just like critical to programs like Studio South Central and Studio DC.
Mm-hmm. Most certainly, and especially when it comes to me being on the board as well, it's been an excellent learning experience that I've had, being able to learn under you all and seeing what the background looks like. Like during the Studio DC program, we got to see a lot of the active work of what it's like designing these projects, but not necessarily the background behind the management of these projects and what goes into the planning. And also just to see some of the challenges and the difficulties that the industry has with its co-creation and the intergenerational leadership. So I'd like to pose this question to Andrew, to ask, what is intergenerational leadership, and how is it or isn't it present in the modern landscape architecture practice? You're muted, Drew.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
The Urban Studio defines intergenerational leadership and mentorship by proactive and meaningful engagement between leaders across generations and by cross-generational partnerships. And we understand that this is a horizontal system, not a vertical one. And the image that you saw on screen is of a cut fill, an event that we threw last month, July 23rd and 24th, which kind of really demonstrates that kind of horizontal engagement between practitioners or even students of that matter. And basically what we're really after is this kind of cross-pollination between, you know, the generations within the profession, understanding that, you know, there's been significant contributions from, you know, folks that have been doing this for a while, and that's not to be made light of, but we understand that everyone could be doing better. The understanding is that landscape architecture is not functioning in its true capacity, or it's the highest capacity it can. And in order for that to happen, we need, you know, both these generations to be talking to one another and influencing one another.
Awesome, awesome. And what is wrong with the old guard, and what is wrong with the new guard?
So I would say, you know, just like I said, there's definitely been significant contributions from, you know, senior practitioners or, you know, folks that have been doing this for a long time. But I think we understand, again, in the current climate, you can make an objective point that, you know, some of old practitioners or old practice hasn't adapted fast enough, and in a lot of ways, not just in relation to kind of the social impacts of landscape architecture, but even, you know, in terms of workplace issues and like benefits, fair working hours, compensation, things like that. And at the Urban Studio, we pride ourselves in adapting fast and paying attention to the nuances of different situations, especially when in regards to community engagement. And I would say, one of the problems with the new guard or the younger generation of folks is kind of a constant complacency or maybe like an imposter syndrome where younger folks don't feel as confident that they can go out and do the things necessary to affect change. And, you know, we try to instill in our design emergence programs and definitely, you know, in any interaction with younger folks that, you know, you don't need to have this kind of fixed capacity to make change. You know, you just have to kind of show up and execute. And that's important to actually be present, but then be mindful of how you show up. So we really want to let people know that well, younger folks especially, that it's okay to be critical of what has happened in the past, but really try to carve out your own space in the present, you know, because eventually you'll be that old guard.
Exactly. A lot of the youth need to understand that they can fit into these fields. And lastly, considering all these difficulties and differences, how can they both work together to move forward?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a level of sacrifice on both sides, you know, in terms of folks personally sacrificing, you know, along the lines of what they truly believe in. Maybe you don't work for a certain office or you take a position somewhere else. And then also a level of risk taking, you know, in terms of like going after projects that are non-conventional, you know, taking a career path that's non-conventional. People need to, you know, I think the entire profession needs to kind of step outside of their comfort zone. And I think the last thing I would say also is allyship, you know, and advocacy. You know, I think landscape architects need to make use of course, our allied professionals, architects, engineers, planners, and so forth, but then also advocacy, not only, you know, with like, you know, protesting in the streets and things like that, or working with community organization groups, but also in policy work to make it a little bit easier to advocate and work and get some of these things done actually in project work. So I think, you know, around the board, landscape architects are going to have to increase their capacity and, you know, their skill set in order to make their profession what we really want it to be. And I think, you know, just to close it out, we're going to talk about our last value, and I'm going to bring Maisie back, and she's going to talk about elevating experts of lived experience.
I think what we all need to remember, Drew, is that the people who are living in landscapes are experts in that land in the way designers can never be. And that's why our mission to advance design thinking for equitable and sustainable urbanism requires that we understand that the community knows more than we do. And if we are elevating the community as experts of lived experience, they should be paid for this expertise. And they should also be elevated in the work that we do, in the processes that we create, in the transformation we want to see. In fact, this is the only ethical way forward. This is our mandate. This is our message to the profession. And this is how we will transform the world. We are the Urban Studio, and we are happy to take your questions.
That was amazing. Thank you guys so much. Learned so much from all of you guys as you were able to really just explain the different components of who you are collectively, but individually what you bring to the table. Yeah, we're open to any questions that the group might have. So feel free to please place it in the chat. Oh, okay, I see there's one coming. Okay, so I guess I'll read this one off from Jenny. All right, so it says, as a young professional who recently quit a job owning to the fact that it was gaslight speaking out of deep issues of racism in my workplace, I've been finding meaningful work addressing systematic issues in landscape architecture and planning in partnership with community organizations. These organizations are also formed by professionals who are trying to find ways to address meaningful issues outside of work. Do you have any advice for young professionals on how to balance, evaluate findings, experiences that are meaningful and will address using professional skills versus being complicit to workplace that refuse to acknowledge systems of injustice?
Does anyone want to jump in on that?
Or we want to take that? I think we can all jump in on that. I think Drew's work speaks a lot of what you were saying earlier. Drew speaks to some of this, so I would relate to you.
I think you know, it's a tough spot for young folks because you know you want the mentorship of being in an office, and you want the experience of seeing work built. And all that comes with that from working from an organization. But again, that might come at sometimes the sacrifice of your own personal values and things like that. So ultimately, you might have to make, like I said, some level of sacrifice in terms of your like living condition. You know, I've worked in multiple cities as a designer. You might have to really extend your search for where you want to practice and really evaluate you know, what is it you want to do with your career. And then also be willing to do some investigative work on your own in terms of like, you know, bolstering your skills. I mean, I'm always telling people that the internet is the ultimate equalizer in terms of like, you know, all the things that that you might want to learn. And most of the things you might want to learn are available with the you know, clicking of a Google search. So you know, it's definitely going to be a balance, and I think each person's situation is going to be different. But ultimately, you might just have to take yourself out of your comfort zone and possibly, you know, move to a different city to work for an organization that aligns with your values. And ultimately, that might be that great experience for you. But I think, you know, one thing I will tell a lot of people is don't feel too tied down by like one direction. Your path to a career is, I mean, you can practice landscape architecture forever as long as you can draw and sit at a desk. So like, you know, you have a lot of time to kind of figure this stuff out. So you don't need to be fixated on, you know, one year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years of your career. So.
I have a couple of things to add to that. I think also strategy wise, I think it's important to unpack these concerns too. So as you're approaching employers or potential colleagues, to be able to understand like what are the musts in this firm or where there's some wiggle room, and to actually voice to what you really want to learn from any given scenario. So it should be about co-learning. It should be about you're gaining something from that experience. In a myriad of ways too. Because I think also leadership should be accountable to understand that these are major concerns. Like we can't do a lot of this work that we want to do because we can't get paid for it. So we collectively have to figure out together how to increase the value for this stuff and like be each other's allies in order to do that, and advocates.
I think the other thing too, Jen, along those lines is that I don't know if people understand the importance of influence in an organization, especially young people. You need to know how to build those relationships and those allies inside of an organization in order to provide influence. I think studying how to have crucial conversations, you know, understanding that people who disagree with you or who may be behaving in a way that you don't like are people, and they can be influenced. I'm not saying that everybody will always believe everything that you believe, but I'm also saying don't miss out on those opportunities where you could influence someone if you had the right strategy. And I think where you work is where you spend the best part of your day, right? And you want that environment to be an environment that feeds your soul. And to do that, you have to create relationships that are supportive, especially when you're in the work and you're in the grind and you're in the hustle. And so you have to know how that is done. And there's techniques that you can incorporate, what people tend to call soft skills, to help you gain those relationships and even leadership positions in organizations, because we need to change how these organizations are led. And we need to work at developing healthy relationships to do that.
I wanted to chime in on Maisie's point there as well in terms of building relationships. You can do that in your workplace for sure, and it's always great to find a place that shares your values and is doing the type of work that you're most passionate about. But sometimes that can be really hard, especially when you feel like you don't have a lot of options. And so for me, the route that I took was I worked in private practice, and I reached out to organizations that I knew were allies of mine or knew organizations that were doing work that I was interested in doing, grassroots organizations, and getting involved in that level and really getting involved in a lot of the LAF programs that they have going on. That was really, for me as a young professional, something that elevated what I had to do, what I got to do, and what I had to say. I joined the LAF board of directors as an Olmsted Scholars representative. So I didn't have the same obligations that traditional board members have, but I was still allowed that opportunity as an Olmsted Scholar. So use your resources, like Jen and Maisie said, be strategic about the relationships you're building, but also be authentic with those relationships, and, and seek out people who do work that you're inspired to do, and work to build those relationships with them and build those soft skills. So,
yeah, and Kendra, you totally glossed over how you use mentors. Like, Kendra knows everybody in the profession, and everybody is a mentor to Kendra. Every time she's having a lunch, will you be my mentor? Will you be my mentor? I've never seen a Rolodex of more mentors than Kendra has. And so you didn't even mention that.
Well, I mean, that is like that's part of it, in the sense of asking for help. I come from a background where I am the first in my family to get elevated degrees. My family is not well connected. My family is, they're very simple people, and I love them very much, but it's not it's not conducive to helping me with my professional life. And so I had to go out and seek those relationships and meet those people and ask them, like, hey, would you be willing to share your knowledge with me? Would you be willing to give me advice? Because I know what that's like to be in a firm and you're a young professional. You don't know, you don't have the experience with this. You don't have the experience navigating a particularly like racist or tension filled environment. And you need those people. And that's why this intergenerational leadership and mentorship is so important, is because you need those people to help guide you through some of those tough experiences that you're going to face as a professional, whether it be race related or just project related. It's not an easy profession to always navigate. And so I got in the habit of building up mentors and people, who I admired what they did and how they did it, and asking for that type of support.
Awesome. And Jen has a wonderful note in the chat for more opportunities for making connections. Jen, did you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, and I guess this may have come from the pandemic, but I've been finding a lot of community under Slack channels, workspaces. So they are public. There is a lot that have emerged. Design Justice Network, the Designers Protest Collective, that have aligned values. So there's things out there too, and adjacent design disciplines too.
I think we have a question from Jason in the chat. Monique, I can read it if you want me to go ahead and just do that.
Sure, yeah. And there was also one above. Melissa had another question as well, but you can read Jason's if you'd like.
So Jason's question is, can you speak more to your origin and how you set up the studio? How do you seek out projects and get funding? Do most of your projects come from the local communities you reside in? I'm interested in eventually starting something myself with a lot of the same values in mind. Do you have any advice for people looking to break off from the standard practice and start something more innovative?
Jason, what you need to know is that the Urban Studio has a fee-for-service program, and for a small fee, we can teach you everything you know about how to start your own business. I'm just joking, just kidding. Not really, no, we do that. So if you're interested, hit us up. But we all started because of a real interesting connection. David, Drew, and I were members of the Innovation and Leadership Fellowship at the same time, we're part of the same cohort. We're part of cohort 2, the best cohort for that LAF fellowship in the history of the program, or the best cohort that there will ever be. Jen, of course, helped to coordinate that program, so we met her at that time. And then Kendra was on the board of LAF at the same time, so she saw our presentations and our work as it was unfolding. And as you
asked Maisie to be my mentor,
which is how I know what she does and how she gets all of this soft skills training. And then, of course, you know that we created a pilot project. Kendra and I, and Jelani was one of the participants in that project. And that's how we ended up creating the Urban Studio. And so it speaks very, very clearly to both our values that we've led with today, but also for making those deep connections with people who share your values. Because, you know, the explosive growth that we've had in this last year belies the fact that we've only been around for over a year. And we're having a tremendous impact, and we're really excited about that. But we're able to do that because of our networks, because of communities like this, because of people who support our work. And as a nonprofit, we accept donations. Visit theurbanstudio.org to give us a donation if you like. But we also go after fee-for-service projects, and we go after grants. And that's our business structure and our model. And we lead with our values in the way that we apply for those opportunities. Oh, and lastly is a new model that Drew recently created from scratch by getting donations from corporations to support Cut-Fill at a very important time in the unfolding of the public discourse in America. And he was able to have a successful program with a sponsorship model.
So Brenda asked, I was really amazed by your closing thoughts about paying the community for their input. I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more about how that would work. Would you literally give money to the people, or what is an example of when that has happened?
Jelani, did you want to talk a little bit about how you got paid through the Studio DC program?
How I got into it?
No, how you were compensated.
How you got paid.
We got paid in stipends every week for coming through. So yeah, every week that we come through to the lessons, every 1 or 2 sessions, we get paid at the end of the day, and then paid during the final presentation, the last couple $100 that we were given. I can't remember the exact amount we were awarded, but it was a very good amount, very nice amount for all of us 15 to 18-year-old teenagers to have some extra cash.
So for Studio DC specifically, we went after a grant that allowed us to fund the program and help us run the program. And through sponsorship, we were able to provide materials and things like that for the program. However, through our funding stream, we decided intentionally, Maisie and I made the decision to pay our students. We realized that these students are making a sacrifice to come every Saturday for 10 Saturdays, every Saturday, like every week in a row, for 5 hours. That's a lot of time out of their week, and time they could either be used to study or to work another job, but we were simultaneously providing a resume building experience while also paying them for their time. And so the studio assistants got $600 as total stipend, and our student participants got $500 stipends. And every week, like Jelani said, they were paid for their hours of work. So they came in, and there were conversations there were crucial and tough conversations that had to be had about, what is showing up on time? What is professionalism? Earning this money. And that's just because we're dealing with teenagers. We don't necessarily do that with the community, but I know we're working to build that funding into our grants. Like the more people talk about equity, it's great to talk about it. It's great to have these webinars, but if you're not putting resources towards these things, if you're not putting parts of your grant funding towards paying communities, you're really not doing equity. Like you're using people for their time and their expertise, and you don't want to pay them. None of us want to go into a situation and not be paid. So why would we expect that from the community? So we try to build that in to our fees and our grant writing processes and things of that nature.
Oh, grant writing is going to be so important in this space too. Learning how to write well, knowing how to put together a grant proposal, and how to search for them.
Someone put in the chat, and there aren't any more questions in the chat, but someone did put
We have one more.
Oh, we do? Oh, sorry, I didn't see it.
No worries. It was actually the first one before the one I read off, but it says, what drew you to the profession and what ideas do you have for us to attract a more representative and diverse society of professionals?
I don't think David has had a chance to answer a question yet, so I want to give him an opportunity.
Sure, I'll jump in. So, so what drew me into landscape architecture really was being involved in a high school youth-oriented program, a youth environmental justice program. So I learned a little bit about, the impacts of industry in my neighborhood. And so that got me thinking about the important contributions that youth can make towards just like holding elected officials accountable and being kind of a voice in drafting policy. And so for me, I was exposed to some of that and like really just like understanding that, harmful land uses exist in my neighborhood and what can be done about this. So I jumped into urban planning because it takes that macro scale approach. But ultimately, like around the time I was finishing up with school, there was a shutdown of like a battery recycling plant. And so that got me thinking about things like remediation and really figuring out how to address lead impacted soil. And so as I was thinking about that, I saw that landscape architecture as a profession had like a little notch that was, putting out research around that, figuring out how to really use plants to address lead impacted soil. So I jumped into that, and then I also learned a little bit about some of the engagement practices that landscape architecture professionals were doing. When I went out to study at the University of Washington, a few of the professors there were really like about learning to engage community members and doing it in a way that really moves away from traditional engagement practices. And so I was really eager to learn about that. So generally that's what has led me into the profession, and just being really passionate about engagement and really passionate about addressing inequitable land uses.
And David, you're also an artist and also an urban planner as well. And I think that David is so humble when talking about himself. You forget he has a broad set of skills that goes across disciplines.
Thank you, Maisie.
You're welcome. Jen, did you want to talk a little bit about how you got into the profession?
You say Jelani or Jen? Sorry, Jen.
Yeah.
I think it stems like way back. So like, it's interesting. I'm from the Northwest, so I'm from like the suburbs of Seattle, which you would think that I would had a lot of experience in nature. Like I have like gorgeous landscapes in the Pacific Northwest, but actually my experiences were primarily like the suburbs and cities. Because my parents, so like I grew up in the suburbs, and then we would go to the International District in Seattle to get our groceries. We would go get lunch. And then all of our family, extended family, lived in Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. So we went to Chinatown a lot, Richmond, which was a predominantly Chinese, Asian neighborhood. So it was a lot of, I think what was interesting to me was observing the differences in how people felt in different places. So seeing what my parents, how they felt in the suburbs was drastically different than when we went to Chinatown, or then we went into that national district. I like felt it viscerally and wanted sort of to unpack and understand why places made people feel differently. So I think that kind of was at the beginning for me.
And can I touch on this real quick? Because I'm not quite in the profession yet, but what got me into wanting to study architecture and landscape architecture is when I had the opportunity to go to South Africa in 2017, 2018 with my family, because they have a curriculum development program called BITRIC, and they went over there to try to teach it in South Africa. And during my stay there, a friend that was helping us to transition, because we were trying to move at the time, showed me to some of the townships in the area, which are the ghettos and the slums, like the worst of the worst places in South Africa. And after going there and seeing crudely built townhouses right next to tin roof shacks and dirt roads, and going through those different places in the community and seeing it everywhere I went, while being able to live in places where it's high-rise apartments and amusement parks, restaurants, movie theaters, and just seeing that drastic disparity between the two groups simply because an architect or a group like the type of people that are in this meeting were all together and decided that one group of people were going to have a certain quality of life and another group were not, right? And after seeing that, it just gave me and my entire family a desire to try to fix those disparities that are put into place so we can take back these skills and being able to implement it to give everybody a quality of life that we can all enjoy. So that's just a short way of how I got into the industry. But as to bring in a more diversified audience, I can at least speak for the students that young people need to be more aggressively initiated into these architecture and engineering practices, because we have a huge need as a country ourselves and the world in general. There's a whole lot of development. We have a lot of countries that are still developing with all this new technology that we're coming up with that need to be fixed, and have these systems like the apartheid system in South Africa to be torn down and corrected so that the entire world as a human race, human species can move forward into the future. And even in America, we have a failing infrastructure with people who are having polluted water and just all that sorts of stuff that needs to be corrected. So the youth can be interested in that. We don't always want to just spend all our time on our phones and on social media. What I've seen both in college and high school environments, because I've dual enrolled at the University District in Columbia here in DC, is that we just need a purpose. That's all we're looking for. We want to find something that we're passionate about and can do every day. But because no one's leading us in that direction to try to find it, we're idling with recreational activities that don't have any return or help us at all in the future. That way we are wandering or don't really find our passions until we're in our late 30s and then going back to school to try to get these knowledge. But by then we have families and it's too late. So I definitely think that if any of you in the audience who are listening are involved with any sort of youth groups or know a high school that's nearby that has a similar program, please get involved and let them shadow you, teach them the industry. And even if they don't like it, that's fine. Help them find something that they do like that's productive and can contribute to humanity, because that's all we really need and are looking for. There are thousands of kids out there who would love to be in this industry, but they just don't know it exists yet. So that's my spiel on how to bring more into the industry.
I think that's a good endpoint, Jelani. Monique, what do you think?
Absolutely, yes. Amazing. Thank you all so much. This is exactly why this conversation is so important, so necessary. You guys are doing amazing work, and I'm just so proud of you all. Keep it up. We're here to support you. I'm going to drop your website in the chat. Please support them. Donations, connect with them, reach out if you have any questions or partnerships that you want to do with the Urban Studio. Please, they're amazing resources and are definitely trailblazing in this area of landscape architecture. So with that, thank you all for joining, participating, being present, showing up. We appreciate you. And again, thank you so much, Urban Studio. And yeah, we'll see you guys soon.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you.